This conversation is powered by Google Illuminate. Check out illuminate.google.com for more. Welcome to the Discussion, everyone. Today we're diving into a really interesting debate, the age of the Earth. Young Earth creationism. The idea that the Earth is only 6,000 years old. It's a big one. But what if some of the arguments against an old Earth actually point to the opposite?
Exactly. It's all about looking at the evidence with a fresh perspective, I think.
Right. Let's start with the very little sediment on the seafloor argument. Young Earth proponents, they often use this, right?
But a restored Earth, renewed by God, that would show the same thing, wouldn't it? It doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't much older before.
Precisely. It's a clever argument, I'll give them that, but it really falls apart when you look at it closely. Okay, let's move on to the very little salt in the sea argument. The idea is that millions of years would have made the oceans much saltier.
Yeah, again, a divinely restored Earth could easily explain that. God's capable of, managing the Earth's systems. It's not really evidence against an older age.
And what about the rapidly decaying magnetic field? That's another one young Earth proponents like to use.
But God's capable of changing things, right? The magnetic field's behavior doesn't tell us anything definitive about the Earth's overall age.
It's all about considering the possibility of divine intervention and a previous age, I think. What about carbon-14 in supposedly ancient fossils? Isn't that a problem for an old Earth?
Not necessarily. Different dating methods give you different results. The existence of carbon-14 doesn't automatically rule out a much older Earth that was later um, restored.
Right. And the helium in radioactive rocks, another argument used by young Earth proponents.
But again, it's just one dating method. It doesn't account for potential changes or, a previous age. The Bible itself hints at a time before the creation of Adam, doesn't it?
It's a matter of interpreting the evidence within a broader theological framework, I think. Let's talk about comets. Their short lifespan is often cited as evidence for a young Earth.
But God's creative power isn't limited, is it? Creating new comets isn't impossible. It's a flawed argument, really.
And what about DNA found in ancient bacteria? Does that support a young Earth?
No, actually, it challenges the young Earth view. Ancient DNA just shows that life has existed for a long time. It doesn't mean the Earth itself is young.
It's crucial to avoid letting scientific theories dictate our theological interpretations, I think. Now let's look at the scriptural evidence. You mentioned several verses that point to a previous age.
Absolutely. Verses like Job 8:8, Psalm 104:5-6, and Deuteronomy 4:32, they actually encourage us to inquire about the former age. That implies a time before the current creation narrative, right?
These verses strongly suggest a previous age, a time before the creation of Adam.
Precisely. And that's incompatible with a young Earth.
And what about verses like Ecclesiastes 1:9-11 and Ecclesiastes 3:15-17?
These verses talk about things that have been and will be, suggesting a cyclical nature of time and events, which fits with a much longer timeline. God's judgment extends beyond the current era. Luke 1:70 and Titus 1:2 also mention events since the world began, or from the age, further supporting the idea of a previous age. Exactly. Taken together, these verses paint a picture of a much older Earth than 6,000 years.
So the arguments against an old Earth, when you examine them closely, don't actually support a young Earth.
No, they often fall apart under scrutiny. They're based on incomplete or misinterpreted data, I think.
And the scriptural evidence strongly suggests a previous age before the current creation narrative.
This previous age is crucial. It provides context for the current creation and God's ongoing judgment.
It's a more nuanced and comprehensive understanding of God's work, for sure. Some might argue that these interpretations contradict literal readings of Genesis.
But a literal interpretation of Genesis, taken out of context, can lead to misunderstandings. We need to consider the whole Bible, not just one part.
It's about understanding the literary genres and the overall message of Scripture.
Precisely. We shouldn't let a rigid interpretation of one section contradict the broader message of the entire Bible.
It's about finding harmony between science and faith, really. The key is to consider the context of the biblical text.
Absolutely. The creation accounts in Genesis should be understood within their literary and historical context.
It's not about rejecting science, but about interpreting it correctly.
And it's about understanding the Bible's message in its entirety, not just isolated passages.
It's a matter of integrating faith and reason. This broader perspective allows for a more complete understanding of God's plan.
It allows us to reconcile seemingly conflicting ideas.
It's about embracing a more holistic view of creation.
It's about seeing the bigger picture, yeah.
It's about understanding God's work in its entirety. For those interested in learning more, I recommend exploring the resources mentioned in the show notes.
There's a lot of information out there to help you understand this complex topic.
That was a great discussion. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.